The 1970 season opened with MLB still settling into a new look. League divisions had been introduced just 1 year before, splitting both the American and National League into East and West for the first time. Baseball was entering a new era, but the storylines that summer were still fairly familiar. The Baltimore Orioles were elite, but now looking for revenge. The New York Mets were out to prove their miracle of 1969 was no fluke, and a group of young Reds nicknamed the Big Red Machine were starting to rev their engines. The Orioles had been embarrassed in the 1969 World Series, losing to the Mets in one of the biggest shocks in baseball history, but they weren't about to let it happen again. Managed by Earl Weaver, Baltimore was a machine in its own right, and their 1970 team is still remembered as one of the most balanced rosters ever assembled. Boog Powell slugged his way to the AL MVP, Frank Robinson was steady as ever, and Brooks Robinson continued his reign as the greatest defensive third baseman in history. The pitching staff was led by Jim Palmer, Mike Cuellar, and Dave McNally, three true aces who each could have anchored just about any rotation in the game. Baltimore won 108 games and ran away with the AL East. Meanwhile, in the National League, Sparky Anderson, in his very first year as Reds manager, leaned on a roster that was as talented as it was young. Johnny Bench was just 22 years old, but already hitting like a Hall of Famer, belting 45 home runs on his way to MVP honors. Tony Perez, Pete Rose, and a young Dave Concepcion filled out the lineup, giving Cincinnati the look of a team that could dominate for years to come. They stormed to 102 wins and made it clear that a new titan in the National League had arrived. Elsewhere around baseball, there were plenty of side stories. In Minnesota, Harmon Killebrew continued his march toward 500 home runs, and Jim Perry took home AL Cy Young. Willie Mays, though aging, was still dazzling Giants fans with his brilliance in the twilight of his career. And the Pirates, who won the NL East, broke ground on a new stadium called Three Rivers, signaling baseball's slow but steady move away from quirky ballparks toward multi-purpose concrete bowls that defined the 70s. The postseason, though, belonged to the heavyweights. In the ALCS, the Orioles swept the Twins for the second straight year. Brooks Robinson put on a defensive clinic even before the World Series began, but he was just getting started. In the NL, the Reds made quick work of the Pirates, sweeping them as well to punch their ticket to the Fall Classic and do battle with Baltimore. But the 1970 World Series became the Brooks Robinson show. In one of the most dominant defensive performances in baseball history, he executed play after play at third base that defied belief. Robinson also hit .429 with 2 home runs to win Series MVP, but it was his glove that made his performance so legendary. The Orioles beat the Reds in 5 games, making up for their 1969 loss and cementing themselves as the team of the early 70s. The Orioles had absolutely dominated the American League 2 seasons in a row, but the Reds, despite losing, had taken the first step toward what would soon become a dynasty. In time, they'd be back stronger and even harder to stop. Baseball in the 70s was taking shape, and 2 of the decade's defining teams had just squared off in the same October. Today's video is sponsored by Manta Sleep. I've been enjoying the final month of summer, but when the sun sets, my nighttime routine is absolutely locked in. And that's thanks in large part to Manta Sleep. With their help, I literally fall asleep in a few minutes every single night, stay asleep, and never wake up tired. I've actually been using their masks since I was in college. They have a wide variety of extremely comfortable 100% blackout masks that will fit anybody's head. Personally, I use the silk mask for both midday naps and at night. All these bright lights outside my house, gone. I also use their red night light so I don't get one-shotted by the normal bathroom light, and these blue light blockers for video editing or even driving at night so I can tolerate all those modern headlights which should be straight up illegal. Use the link in the pinned comment to check out the rest of their products, all of which you can try risk-free for 60 days, and use code KAI10 for 10% off your order. But the 1971 season gave us one of the most star-studded All-Star games ever played, a World Series that went 7 games, and the full arrival of one of the most dominant pitchers in history. The Baltimore Orioles once again looked like a juggernaut. After winning 108 games the year before, Earl Weaver's club found another gear on the mound. For the second and likely last time in baseball history, a single team had 4 20-game winners in the same season: Jim Palmer, Mike Cuellar, Dave McNally, and Pat Dobson. That rotation was absurd, but the lineup wasn't far behind, and the O's cruised to 101 wins, taking their 3rd straight AL East crown. But in the National League, the Pittsburgh Pirates had something special led by Roberto Clemente. At 36 years old, Clemente was not merely a great right fielder, he was a national hero. a perfectionist in the field and one of the purest hitters the game had ever seen. Willie Stargell brought the muscle, and Pittsburgh won 97 games to capture the NL East, edging out a Cardinals team leaning on NL MVP Joe Torre and Bob Gibson's brilliance, who won the Cy Young a year earlier. The 1971 season also gave us the birth of Vida Blue. The 21-year-old lefty for the Oakland Athletics burst onto the scene with a triple-digits fastball and went 24-8 with a 1.82 ERA, struck out 301 hitters, winning AL Cy Young and MVP. He was a phenom, selling out crowds across the country and giving the A's an aura that would soon headline the decade. Oakland also won 101 games, and the seeds of their dynasty were planted. Perhaps the greatest moment of the regular season, however, came at the All-Star Game in Detroit. It was a meeting of eras. 22 future Hall of Famers suited up, from Willie Mays and Hank Aaron to Johnny Bench, Rod Carew, and Reggie Jackson. Jackson stole the show with one of the most iconic home runs ever hit, a stratospheric blast off the light tower at Tiger Stadium. The AL won 6-4, but the real story was the torch-passing moment for the sport. And when October came, the Orioles swept the Athletics in the ALCS, proving Oakland wasn't quite ready to dethrone them yet. In the NLCS, the Pirates took down the Bobby Bonds and Willie Mays-led San Francisco Giants in 4 games, setting up a World Series between the established Baltimore and Pittsburgh's hungry challengers. The 1971 World Series went the distance, and it turned into the Roberto Clemente series. The Orioles jumped out to a 2-0 lead, but Pittsburgh came back to go up 3-2. However, the O's took Game 6 on a Brooks Robinson walk-off, setting up Game 7 in Baltimore, where Clemente rose to the moment, homering in the 4th inning, and behind Steve Blass's complete game, the Pirates stunned the Orioles to win the championship. Clemente hit safely in all 7 games, batting .414 and earned World Series MVP. With his grace and greatness, he etched his name into immortality with one of the finest individual series performances ever. The 1972 season was one of baseball's strangest and messiest years. It started with labor turmoil and ended with the dawn of a dynasty, along with the tragic death of one of baseball's biggest stars. But prior to that, for the first time in history, a player's strike delayed opening day by a week and a half. On the field, the American League was undergoing a makeover. 1972 marked the debut of the Texas Rangers, the relocated Washington Senators franchise. It also marked the final year before the American League adopted the designated hitter. But the season belonged to the Oakland Athletics. They had a swagger unlike any team in baseball, with mustaches, colorful uniforms, and a maverick owner in Charlie Finley who embraced controversy. Their lineup also featured Reggie Jackson in his prime, Joe Rudy, and Sal Bando, to name a few. On the mound, Catfish Hunter, Ken Holtzman, and Vida Blue gave them firepower, while Rollie Fingers began carving out his legacy as one of the first modern closers. In the National League, the Pittsburgh Pirates remained strong behind Clemente and Willie Stargell, but the Cincinnati Reds were just as good, and Johnny Bench put together another NL MVP season. As for the other awards, Dick Allen of the White Sox took AL MVP, while the Phillies' Steve Carlton and Cleveland's Gaylord Perry won the Cy Youngs. But the wildest drama came in the AL East. Because of the shortened schedule, the Detroit Tigers finished with 156 games played, while the Boston Red Sox played 155. And that made all the difference, because the Tigers ultimately edged Boston for the division crown by 1 extra win. And the playoffs reflected this year's unpredictability. In the ALCS, the A's faced Detroit in a brutal 5-game series that included one infamous brawl. The A's ultimately survived, but not without losing Reggie Jackson to a torn hamstring. In the NLCS, the Reds battled the Pirates in a dramatic series that also went the full 5 games. And Game 5 turned into one of the most heartbreaking moments in Pirates history, giving up a game-tying home run to Johnny Bench in the 9th, and then losing the game on a wild pitch, allowing George Foster to score. And that year's World Series lived up to the same chaotic standard. The A's and Reds went 7 games, and while Cincinnati had the star power, Oakland had Gene Tennis, a backup catcher who hit just 5 home runs in the regular season, but exploded with 4 home runs and drove in 9 to win World Series MVP. Rollie Fingers was nails, and the A's toppled the Reds to win their first championship since 1930. The triumph of Oakland, though, was followed by tragedy for baseball. On New Year's Eve 1972, Roberto Clemente died in a plane crash while delivering earthquake relief supplies to Nicaragua. Clemente had just notched hit number 3,000 in September, and his death remains one of the sport's most heartbreaking losses. So baseball had a new face in the wild, colorful A's, but it also lost one of its most beloved heroes. The sport was moving into a new era, but it would never forget the greatness of Roberto Clemente. Moving on, the 73 season contains one of the most shocking World Series underdog stories of all time, but the most immediate headline was the DH rule. After years of complaints that pitchers couldn't hit and that offense was dwindling, the American League voted to experiment with the designated hitter in 1973. And on opening day, Yankees' Ron Blomberg entered the history books as the first DH in baseball history. Meanwhile, the defending champ Athletics were busy making headlines on and off the field. Owner Charlie Finley insisted all his players grow mustaches, even offering them a $300 bonus to do it. Soon, the A's were rocking the most rebellious uniform look in baseball. Finley feuded constantly with his stars, but it clearly didn't stop them from winning, as they stormed to 94 wins in their third straight AL West crown. Across the league, milestones and surprises kept piling up. Hank Aaron, now 39 years old, was closing in on Babe Ruth's all-time home run record, finishing 1973 with 713, just one shy. Willie Mays played his final season, suiting up for the New York Mets and providing a symbolic bridge between the Giants' New York days and their replacement franchise. While Nolan Ryan set an unbreakable record by striking out 383 batters. And the pennant races were wild too. In the AL East, Jim Palmer's Cy Young season powered the Orioles to the division title. But in the NL, the Mets looked dead in August, sitting well below 500. Yet somehow, with Cy Young Tom Seaver anchoring the rotation and a late-season surge, they scraped together an 82-79 record. Incredibly, that was good enough to win the NL East, making them one of the most improbable playoff teams in baseball history. As for the MVPs, those went to Reggie Jackson and Pete Rose. In the ALCS, Oakland faced the Orioles. And while Baltimore had more regular season wins, Oakland came up with key hits and Catfish Hunter dominated twice. Oakland won in 5, returning to the World Series. But the NLCS delivered the shocker. The underdog Mets, despite their weak record, bested the mighty Reds in 5 games. Seaver and John Matlock silenced Cincinnati's bats, while Rusty Staub provided much of the offense. And suddenly, the 82-win Mets were in the World Series, where they stunned the baseball world by taking the A's to the brink. Willie Mays, in his final moments as a big leaguer, delivered a memorable RBI single in Game 2. Tug McGraw pitched his heart out, and Rusty Staub again swung a hot bat. But in the end, the A's refused to be denied. Reggie Jackson announced his arrival on the biggest stage, hitting .310 with a home run and 6 RBIs to win World Series MVP. Which brings us to 1974, which was defined by 2 massive storylines: the rewriting of one of the game's most sacred records and the continuation of a dynasty that was unlike anything the sport had seen in a very long time. The season began with all eyes on Hank Aaron. The 40-year-old slugger was one long ball shy of Ruth's 714. Aaron received mountains of hate mail and even death threats for being on the verge of breaking Ruth's record. Even so, he tied it on April 4th. Then on April 8th in Atlanta, Aaron went deep for number 715, officially becoming the all-time home run king, a title he would hold until Barry Bonds in 2007. Meanwhile, in Oakland, the A's were busy adding more drama to their dynasty. Charlie Finley continued to feud with his players, and manager Dick Williams resigned after the 73 championship. So in stepped Alvin Dark to steer the circus. Despite the commotion, the A's remained stacked. They weren't always harmonious, but they were unstoppable when the lights came on, and Catfish Hunter even won the AL Cy Young this year. However, this season also saw the Los Angeles Dodgers emerge as serious contenders, boasting a young infield that would become legendary. First baseman Steve Garvey in particular had a breakout year, hitting .312 with 21 homers to win NL MVP. On the mound for the Dodgers, Mike Marshall won Cy Young. As a team, they won 102 games, blowing past the defending NL champion Reds, and setting up as a new challenger for October. Elsewhere, Nolan Ryan kept blowing hitters away with the Angels, striking out 367 batters, while Lou Brock of the Cardinals broke the single-season stolen base record with 118 swipes. But when October arrived, the playoffs delivered on storylines. In the ALCS, the A's faced the Orioles yet again. Baltimore's Jim Palmer and Mike Cuellar tried to slow them down, but Oakland proved too much yet again, winning in 4 games and advancing to their 3rd straight World Series. In the NLCS, the Dodgers took on the Pittsburgh Pirates. LA combined clutch hitting with strong pitching from Don Sutton to take the series in 4. So the World Series was set with a flashy, up-and-coming Dodgers squad against the two-time defending champion A's. But the '74 series wasn't nearly as close as the Mets scare the year before. Rollie Fingers notched 2 saves, and Reggie Jackson mashed per usual. The A's took the series in 5 games, securing their 3rd straight title, and Fingers was named series MVP. Oakland joined the Yankees of the '30s and the '50s with one of the sport's all-time great runs. And the Dodgers, despite falling short, had shown they were ready to challenge the Reds for National League supremacy. But if you could only pick one year to relive from the 1970s, it might be 1975, because it had a legendary World Series that some call the greatest ever played. The season began with the Oakland A's still on top of the baseball world, obviously winners of 3 straight championships. But once again, Charlie Finley was butting heads with his players, and his insistence on controlling every detail was becoming tiresome. The A's still had Reggie Jackson, Rollie Fingers, and won 98 games, but Catfish Hunter was now pitching for the Yankees, and their grip on the AL was loosening. Meanwhile, 2 National League powerhouses were on a collision course. The Reds had been on the verge of greatness for years, and their lineup was as good as any ever assembled, with the MVP Joe Morgan, Johnny Bench, Pete Rose, Tony Perez, George Foster, and Ken Griffey Sr. In 1975, it all came together. Cincinnati won 108 games, ran away with the NL West, and looked absolutely unstoppable. But their main competition over in the American League was the Boston Red Sox, who had finally pulled themselves out of years of mediocrity led by some new stars. Fred Lynn, who won MVP and Rookie of the Year this season, and fellow slugging rookie Jim Rice. Add in veteran catcher Carlton Fisk, and the Red Sox were legit contenders. They took the AL East with 95 wins. As for the Cy Young Awards, those went to Tom Seaver and Jim Palmer. The ALCS matched the Red Sox against the A's, where their World Series streak came to an abrupt end as Boston swept them in 3 games. In the NLCS, the Reds beat the Pirates just like they had in '72. And the 1975 World Series between the Reds and Red Sox gets plenty of praise as the greatest ever played, and for good reason. Nearly every game was dramatic and filled with unforgettable moments. Game 6, though, is the one that lives on forever. At Fenway Park, the Red Sox trailed 3-2 in the series and fell behind 6-3 in the 8th inning. But Bernie Carbo came off the bench and blasted a 3-run homer to tie the game. It then stretched into extras, setting the stage for one of the most iconic moments in baseball history. In the bottom of the 12th, Carlton Fisk hit a drive down the left field line. Fisk famously waved the ball fair with his arms, jumping as it clanked off the foul pole, producing one of the most replayed highlights in sports history, and forcing a Game 7. But that Game 7 belonged to the Reds, who rallied late, scoring in the 9th inning to win 4-3. Joe Morgan's RBI hit drove in the go-ahead run, and the Reds finally had their long-awaited championship. The Red Sox, despite heartbreak, reignited their franchise and gave fans one of the most cherished moments in baseball lore. The Fisk wave became an eternal symbol of October drama. But after years of close calls, the Red had completed one of the greatest seasons ever, and they carried that dominance into 1976, which marked a new era for baseball, as free agency officially arrived to change the sport forever. Not only did Cincy defend their crown, they obliterated the competition, finishing 102-60, easily winning the NL West with their lineup of superstars. Joe Morgan was simply the best player in baseball. The second baseman hit .320 with 27 homers, 60 stolen bases, and Gold Glove defense on the way to his 2nd straight MVP. Pete Rose hit .323, Tony Perez drove in 91 runs, George Foster was the MVP runner-up, Ken Griffey Sr. hit .336, and behind the plate, Johnny Bench, while not posting his peak numbers, was still the best defensive catcher in the game. The pitching wasn't dominant by name value, but it was effective. Most notably, Rookie of the Year Pat Zachary and closer Raleigh Eastwick, who placed 5th in Cy Young voting. With that balance, they would do something no team had ever done in the divisional era. But before October arrived, the regular season had other major storylines. In the AL, the New York Yankees were back. After more than a decade without a playoff berth, they won 97 games to take the AL East. Catfish Hunter was the staff ace, but catcher Thurman Munson won MVP. Not to mention Greg Nettles, Chris Chambliss, Willie Randolph, and Mickey Rivers. After years of being stuck behind the Orioles, the Yankees were leading the division once again. Elsewhere, the Kansas City Royals announced themselves as contenders, as George Brett blossomed into a superstar. The Royals won 90 games and clinched their first AL West title. On the mound, Jim Palmer won his third Cy Young in 4 years, while Randy Jones of the Padres won it in the NL. The ALCS between Kansas City and New York turned into an instant classic. In the decisive Game 5, Chris Chambliss crushed a walk-off home run to send New York to its first World Series since 1964. Meanwhile, in the NLCS, the Reds faced the Philadelphia Phillies, who had broken through with 101 wins behind Mike Schmidt and Steve Carlton, but the machine brushed them aside in 3 games. The World Series was supposed to be competitive between 2 iconic franchises, but it was nothing of the sort. Cincinnati dismantled New York in 4 games. Johnny Bench hit .533 with 2 homers for Series MVP. Not only did the Big Red Machine repeat, but they were the first team in the divisional era to go undefeated in the postseason, and no team has done it since, staking a claim as perhaps the greatest single season of all time. The Reds had set a gold standard, but no team embraced this new era more aggressively or more controversially than the New York Yankees. The result was one of the most famous nicknames in baseball history. After their humiliating showing in the '76 World Series, owner George Steinbrenner was not about to let that happen again. In the first true test of free agency, Steinbrenner signed slugger Reggie Jackson to a massive 5-year, $3 million deal. Jackson, brash and outspoken, immediately had issues with manager Billy Martin and even with captain Thurman Munson, but he gave the Yankees exactly what they needed with his middle-of-the-order power. In the Bronx Zoo, as the Yankees later came to be known, Billy Martin fought with players and George Steinbrenner. Yet the Yankees thrived. Jackson hit 32 home runs, and the rest of their loaded lineup, along with the pitching staff led by Ron Guidry and Cy Young closer Sparky Lyle, carried New York to 100 wins and another AL East title. In the AL West, the Kansas City Royals were taking yet another step. With George Brett hitting over 300 again, they won 102 games, the best record in baseball, and looked ready to finally seize control of the American League. In the NL, with Tommy Lasorda taking over as manager, the Dodgers rode a star-studded lineup to 98 wins. They were the first team to ever have 4 hitters hit 30 home runs. Steve Garvey, Ron Cey, Reggie Smith, and Dusty Baker all cleared the mark, making the Dodgers lineup one of the scariest in baseball. The Phillies took the NL East thanks to their second straight year with 101 wins, led by Mike Schmidt's 38 home runs and NL Cy Young Steve Carlton's brilliance on the mound. The Reds only won 88 games this year, but they did have the NL MVP for the 5th time of the decade, now with George Foster, while Rod Carew won it in the AL with the Twins, and Lou Brock became the all-time stolen base leader. In the ALCS, the Yankees and Royals met for the 2nd straight year, and KC pushed New York to the limit. The Royals were even up 3-2 in the top of the 9th of Game 5, but allowed 3 runs, and the Yankees ended Kansas City's championship hopes for the 2nd season in a row. In the NLCS, the Dodgers took down the Phillies in 4 games. The defining moment came in Game 3 when LA mounted a furious 9th-inning comeback of their own at Veterans Stadium, so Los Angeles returned to the World Series, where they fell victim to maybe the most iconic individual performance in postseason history. Reggie Jackson turned into a god. After homering in Game 4 and Game 5, Jackson showed up to Game 6, took 3 swings, and hit 3 home runs, each off a different Dodgers pitcher on the first pitch of the at-bat. If you didn't know exactly what made him Mr. October, now you know. The Yankees won their 21st World Series in 6 games, and Reggie's place in history was sealed. Which brings us to 1978, a season that began with the Yankees still basking in the glow of their championship run, but as always with the Bronx Zoo, the theater never stopped. The feud between Billy Martin and Reggie Jackson spiraled so badly that Martin resigned in July with the Yanks 10.5 games behind Boston in the AL East. Despite all the nonsense, the Yankees were still as talented as anyone. Ron Guidry turned in one of the best pitching seasons of all time, going 25-3 with a 1.74 ERA and 248 strikeouts, easily winning the Cy Young Award. And new free agent signee Goose Gossage emerged as the game's most intimidating closer. The Yankees had the ammunition to repeat, but it was going to take one of the wildest turnarounds in history. Up in Boston, the Red Sox kicked off 1978 like they were the best team in baseball, led by Jim Rice, who hit .315 with 46 homers to win the AL MVP. The Sox sprinted out to a massive midseason lead. In mid-July, they got as high as 14 games ahead of the Yankees, appearing to have the division in the bag. But once Bob Lemon took over as the Yankees manager, he helped fuel one of the greatest comebacks ever. The Yankees chipped away at Boston's lead throughout August and September, ultimately finishing dead even at 99 and 63, forcing a one-game playoff at Fenway Park, which became one of the most famous games in baseball history. The Red Sox jumped out to a 2-0 lead behind Carl Yastrzemski and Rick Burleson. For 6 innings, Mike Torres kept the Yankees quiet, but in the 7th, light-hitting shortstop Bucky Dent stunned Fenway by first fouling a ball right off his foot and then lofting a fly ball over the Green Monster for a 3-run homer. The Yankees took the lead, added a couple insurance runs, and Goose Gossage survived furious Boston rallies in the 8th and 9th to win 5-4. The Bucky fucking Dent game became one of the most painful memories in Red Sox history. Elsewhere, Pete Rose put together a 44-game hitting streak, Dave Parker won MVP for the Pirates, and Gaylord Perry won his second Cy Young, now on the Padres. But in the ALCS, the Yankees rolled past the Royals for the 3rd straight year, this time in a less dramatic 4 games. In the National League, the Dodgers also returned to the top of the West, and also beat the Philadelphia Phillies in the NLCS. So we had literally the same exact playoff bracket and results as 1977. The Dodgers took the first 2 games of the World Series, but the Yankees said enough is enough and won 4 straight to clinch in 6. Brian Doyle, a reserve infielder filling in for an injured Willie Randolph, hit .438 in the series, and Bucky Dent won Series MVP. But Reggie Jackson came through in the clutch again, as his 2-run homer in Game 6 was the exclamation point. The Yankees had gone back-to-back for the first time since the days of Mantle and Maris. But in 1979, the small market teams dominated once again. The Pirates were no stranger to October this decade, but in 1979, they were a team that perfectly reflected their chosen anthem, Sister Sledge's disco hit We Are Family. Willie Stargell, now 39 years old, was the father figure of the clubhouse. On the field, he delivered 2, hitting 32 home runs. In a season where the Pirates won 98 games, Pop Stargell was the face of their run. But Stargell wasn't alone. Dave Parker, the reigning NL MVP, continued to shine as one of the game's best hitters, hitting .310 with 25 homers and a cannon arm in right field. The lineup also featured Bill Matlock, Phil Garner, and the speedy Omar Moreno. Their pitching wasn't overpowering, but Kent DeColvey's submarine style out of the bullpen kept opponents off balance, and Bert Blyleven and John Candelaria anchored the rotation. This was a true team. In the American League, the Orioles dominated to the tune of 102 wins. With 3 pitchers who would win at least 1 Cy Young in their career, Baltimore's pitching staff was one of the deepest in baseball. Mike Flanagan won 23 games and the Cy Young. The lineup featured Eddie Murray, just 23 years old and already a superstar, and Ken Singleton, who hit .295 with 35 home runs. Baltimore was well-balanced and disciplined, everything Earl Weaver preached. Elsewhere, Bruce Sutter won NL Cy Young, Angels' Don Baylor won AL MVP, Carl Yastrzemski recorded his 3,000th hit, and slugging surged league-wide. Cubs' Dave Kingman smashed 48 home runs, and Gorman Thomas and Mike Schmidt each hit 45. This was a year where the ball seemed to fly. In the NLCS, the Pirates faced the Reds, who were not to be written off despite the fading of the Big Red Machine. Still, Pittsburgh swept them in 3 games as Stargell hit 2 home runs, advancing the Pirates to their first World Series since 1971. In the ALCS, the Orioles handled the Angels and MVP Don Baylor in 4 games. Baltimore shut them out in Game 4, and Eddie Murray was the star of the series on offense. Baltimore looked like the favorite heading into a World Series that would end up going the distance. The Orioles actually jumped out to a commanding 3-1 series lead, but a 7-1 Game 5 win at Three Rivers swung the momentum. And in Game 6, Pittsburgh shut the Orioles out to set up Game 7, where Willie Stargell delivered the best game of his career. Not only did he go 4 for 5 at the dish, but down 1-0 in the 6th, he blasted a 2-run homer to spark a 4-1 win, completing the comeback to claim their 5th championship in franchise history. Stargell hit .400 with 3 home runs and 7 RBIs in the series, earning World Series MVP. He also won NLCS MVP and shared the regular season MVP with St. Louis's Keith Hernandez, an unprecedented triple crown of hardware. The legacy of 1979 belongs to Willie Stargell and the Pirates. In a decade made up of multi-time champions from the A's to the Reds to the Yankees, the Pirates carved out their own place by doing it their way. And their comeback from a 3-1 deficit in the World Series remains one of baseball's greatest stories. But if you want to see how the next decade began, click here to relive every MLB season of the 1980s.